Hi there and welcome to My Week. I'm Christy McDonald. Thanks so much for joining me. It is all about the media this week on My Week. We're going to have a bigger discussion about the way we get our information, how social media helps shape our opinions, and heading into the 2018 election, taking a closer look at the issues media outlets are covering. We did a show like this right after the presidential election when journalists and media outlets were criticized for not listening to what people really had to say. In the last 2 years, throw in the reality of content manipulation on social media, and yes, the term fake news is still used daily. It's a good time to stop and take a look. So let's get right to it. You know our My Week contributors, Nolan Finley, the editorial page editor of the Detroit News. He also has a radio show on 9:10 a.m. And Stephen Henderson of Detroit Today on WDET and host of American Black Journal. So we have paper, radio, and television covered over there. And welcome back Lee Wilkins. She is the chair of the communications department at Wayne State University, and she specializes in media ethics and media coverage. Lee, it's good to have you back here again. And say hello to Garland Gilchrist. You might know him because he ran a close race for Detroit City Clerk, and he is now the head of the University of Michigan's new Center for Social Media Responsibility. Welcome, Garland. And your name is being floated about as a lieutenant governor candidate, possibly. We might get to that a little later on in the show, as we're always mining for news. But before we kind of jump in on this conversation, you have this new role at U of M and social media responsibility. Go ahead and give us an idea of what that's all about.
Sure. So at the University of Michigan School of Information, we started the Center for Social Media Responsibility because it's an important question. These companies like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube have so much information about people who use the platforms. They also have so much information that flows through them. It's the lens through which so many people view the world. And it's important to ask the question, what are these companies responsible for? It's like a Spider-Man cartoon, you know, to whom much is given, much is required. With great power and great information comes great responsibility. So the Center for Social Media Responsibility will be digging into that question, using research to make sure that we can get a full, accountable set of answers for those questions, and working with policymakers and users to really understand what their responsibilities are as well.
Yeah, because someone's programming those algorithms that make the choice of what we see. So.
Absolutely, and algorithms are designed by people, and people have bias, and we need to understand that.
Yeah. All right, well, let's start our conversation here. I'm going to ask each one of you to go around the table. And Nolan, I'm going to start with you. How would you kind of characterize the state of how we're getting our information, the media's role, and how we're getting things from social media in this past year and a half?
Well, I mean, clearly social media has become dominant. I mean, it's not just in the past year and a half, but over the last several years, the role of social media in informing us has become, I would say, the dominant source of at least our initial exposure to news. Most of us enter the news now through a social media site, and I was very interested in what Garland's doing because I do think this issue of bias in how the social media presents information to us and how it selects which information to put first and which to put last is an important issue in terms of protecting our democracy, protecting our process, and making sure these third parties don't have undue influence over the electoral process.
Stephen, what about you?
So, I mean, I take a sort of historical view of all of these things because media has been with us since the beginning of communication, and there have been different sort of points along our history where a new kind of delivery system or platform really changes the way that we deal with each other. And I think social media is in, sort of the infancy of its influence over communication in our culture, and it's performing poorly, I think is the universal assessment. But I think one of the questions is it performing more poorly than, say, the printing press did when it started to be used for mass communication? Is it performing any worse than television and radio did when they came along? I mean, there are these points along our history where we have to figure out how these new platforms, which enable us to do things in a different way and communicate with each other in different ways, we have to figure out how to use them responsibly.
Do we have to start at zero just because it's a new platform? I mean,
but we always do.
We learn something from
we're inherently
those other
human
platforms
as well, and we're also making the decisions about what news is being covered in newsrooms. And we're having that question every day. Lee, let me go to you, and I want you to tell us what you're thinking.
Well, one of the things about social media that I love in a in a way in the last 18 months is we've sort of ripped the cover off of it and said, you know, there are things going on underneath here that as folks who look at the news and who consume news, we're not aware of. One of the things that I think is good is that we all are beginning to understand that it's not a matter of being well educated, it's not a matter of being literate. We are all subject to fake news, to believing fake news. So it's not just the platforms, it's not just the algorithms. It gets back to what you said. It's about us as human beings, what we're attracted to, what we think is worth sharing. And all that is sort of, to me at least, the deeper stuff about social media that we're just now beginning to get clues about.
And also what we like to hear.
Yep.
And sometimes being very attracted to people who are saying the same things that we think. Garland?
Yeah, well, another piece of this too is, you know, again, these social media platforms are designed experiences. So they're designed to optimize for engagement, for sharing, for comment, for debate. And we need to think about, is that what we want to optimize for? Can we optimize for learning? Can we optimize for productive discourse? Can we optimize for conversation? And these design choices are choices that the companies can make, and they can make differently if the incentives are different. But what are we incentivizing in this market is a real question, and we want to dig into that.
Lee?
Can we optimize for some sort of a platform that doesn't ask us to divide ourselves into people who are my friends and people who aren't my friends? The part of Facebook that everybody says, and it's true, has been used to divide us is baked into the way that platform itself was invented. It's taken us a while to figure out that in the process of connecting with my friends, there's a whole bunch of people that I'm choosing not to connect with. And as a journalist, as somebody whose job it is to inform you about people who are not like you, that's a place where Facebook and platforms like it have really become, in my view, kind of invidious and a serious, I don't want to say threat, but a serious challenge to our normal democratic ways of doing things.
Real quick,
but
Stephen.
I guess one of the questions is, so we say that Facebook was designed to do what it does, but isn't a lot of it just sort of accidental and market driven? I mean, you have a kid in a dorm room who writes an algorithm on the window, and several years later it becomes this huge social media engine. I mean, I thought when Mark Zuckerberg testified before Congress, it was really evident that he still is trying to figure out what he has created and what it should do. Now, he's also pocketing billions of dollars.
I was just going to say, I think
doing
you're taking maybe a little bit of a naive approach. I think he understands where he.
I don't think he knows what. Well, the question I thought was the most interesting that he got asked was, what is Facebook? Right? What is Facebook? And he couldn't really answer it. He said, look, it changes all the time in terms of how people are using it and what the expectations are. And I don't want to give him too much of a break because I think, again, he's a billionaire, he's an adult, he should be acting more responsibly. But there is some zeitgeist to what he has created that I think has to do with the culture more than it does the company itself.
Well, Stephen, that's why it's important that we have more people thinking about what responsibility means in this whole information ecosystem. We cannot rely simply on the platform companies or the people who create them to make those choices. Media makers have a role to play. Users have a role to play. Advertisers have a role to play, and really we haven't talked enough about what the responsibilities are of advertisers in this ecosystem, because if you think about it, the question that I would have liked to have seen asked in that testimony is, who is Facebook's customer? I think our perception is that the users are the customers of Facebook, but we don't pay them anymore, right? And so because of that changes the incentive.
Right.
But I think if you ask a rank and file Facebook user, they would think that Facebook is built for them.
Users,
But I mean, to Lee's point, I mean, this platform that was supposed to expand our universe has enabled a lot of self-segregation. We isolate ourselves in very comfortable pools of people, people who tend to share our views and agree with us, and we don't get a whole lot of exposure in the same way you did when mass media was dominant, and you were forced to listen to and hear views that might not be your views.
Well, you didn't have as much choice.